Time is now 1 o'clock, so I'll go ahead and get started with today's presentation. As I stated before, my name is Veronica Parker and I'm with AEBG TAP. Today's webinar is focused on using human-centered design for three-year planning with Virginia Hamilton of AIR and Randy Tillery of WestEd. Before they come on, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items to ensure we all have a successful and engaging webinar experience this afternoon. The PowerPoint presentation for this webinar is available in the resources pod. So you can click on the file titled HCD AEBG Launch Webinar. When you click on this file, please select Download File, and the file will be downloaded to whatever browser your computer uses to download files, and you'll be able to use that to follow along with today's presentation. If there are any questions, please be sure to post those questions in the chat pod. Throughout this presentation, either Randy or Virginia will be answering your questions. If they do not get to you immediately, please be patient and they will respond to you as soon as they are able to. But like I said, if you have any questions, please be sure to post those in the chat pod and they will be addressed. This webinar is being recorded and it will be available on the California Adult Education website. I will be sure to post the URL on where you can find this webinar. So this afternoon, if you have to leave for any reason or you want to go back to reference any of the materials covered, you'll be able to listen to the recording as well as download the webinar presentation. I am not seeing any technical issues, so that's great. But if you do have any technical issues throughout the webinar, please be sure to post those into the chat pod. I'll continuously monitor the chat pod, and if there are any technical issues, we will resolve them via a private chat. Immediately following this presentation, an evaluation will appear on your screen. Please be sure to fill out this evaluation. It is our way of letting Randy and Virginia know what you thought about this webinar, as well as address any technical assistance or professional development needs you have at this time. Now I will turn it over to Randy, who will get us started with today's webinar. Randy?
Great. Thank you, Veronica. Welcome everyone today. We're happy to have you here today. Virginia and I are very excited about bringing human-centered design to AEBG, and adult education practitioners in California. I guess we call it AEP now. I keep forgetting to do that. My name is Randy Tillery. I am with WestEd. I should also mention until about a year and a half ago, I was a senior dean for workforce and economic development at the Contra Costa Community College District, and so was part of the Contra Costa Adult Education Consortium. So I am familiar with the work both on the ground and now kind of supporting the work with the Chancellor's Office here at WestEd.
Hi, I'm Virginia Hamilton with American Institutes for Research, and I've also been around many of these systems for many years. Most recently, before I came to AIR, I was a regional administrator for the U.S. Department of Labor, overseeing WIOA, among other programs. So we also have a bunch of great coaches who we'll talk a little bit more about later who are supporting this project.
Right, so we're going to start off by basically answering a basic question. Why are we doing this? So Virginia and I literally hatched this idea on a train on March 6th after the big field team convening in Sacramento, because Virginia had been doing work with human-centered design in the Department of Labor for a number of years and had brought this training to really 2,000 practitioners within that system. And it's something that has caught on in a lot of human service systems for how we begin to be sure our work is focused on our customers in ways that really can allow us to be transformative as opposed to thinking with our various kind of regulatory or kind of institutional or disciplinary hats. But, really, if you think about it, part of this came from the field. So Virginia did a presentation in January at the big convening. There was a lot of response to that of people wanting to actually get involved with it, learn more about it, learn how they could use it as part of their own planning processes. A lot of what we're asking the field this year in relationship to your three-year planning process is to incorporate design thinking into that process. And as we've worked on what the planning guidance will look like for this year, we've really tried to layer design thinking into those requirements and that document. So you can see that there are ways to think about how you do your planning. There's steps and stages to it. There's a process for really understanding your customers better that really has to be a part of it. And so this is sort of really how you begin to incorporate those principles into your own thinking as well in terms of your planning with your colleagues in the field. Also, change is hard. It's hard because we kind of have all of our own limitations for the work and around the work that we do and how we understand our customers and our systems. And so it makes transformative conversations very difficult. I know within my own consortium, with people that I love and respect across different systems, we kept running into various roadblocks for our ability to really think creatively about how to really do the work we were trying to do. And so this is a way to kind of support that. And really focusing on our customers is a way of kind of focusing on what's most important. And so human-centered design, while it really started in kind of the world of product design and places like that, really works just as well when you apply it to kind of service delivery and education as it does other systems. One of the things in AEBG is that I think oftentimes it can be really overwhelming. I feel like this is just sort of the list of acronyms related to AEBG or initiatives. You have AEBG, you have CDCP, you have Perkins, you have WIOA, you have strong workforce floating out there. We have these 5 field teams. People were reporting through TOPS Pro Enterprise or through MIS. We have 3-year planning processes. Now you're reporting into NOVA. You're doing your annual CFADs. And it just feels like you spend all your time responding to different kind of things that you have to comply with. And there's so much information to absorb that it can be really difficult to simplify or distill down to what's really important. And another way of looking at this is if you think about the systems just in with the adult education program, you have K-12 adult schools, you have community colleges, ideally you have your workforce boards and your local workforce system. It's hard enough to get those 3 systems to align and to kind of have the right kinds of conversations. You have all these funding streams that everyone's dealing with, all of which have their own kind of obligations and requirements, and everyone gets bogged down in sort of how they have to comply with the regs for the funding they administer. And then you have all the governance, admin, and reporting stuff. And this becomes just a set of things that can seem like they're sort of continually in your way. Whereas if we were able to maybe to take a moment just to get outside the box of those things and really think about where our customers sit in this, it might help us to kind of move to a next step or to another level, really. So, we're going to say this to you a number of different ways, but there's really kind of what we're talking about is basically a training that lasts 9 weeks. This is the launch webinar that we're having. We had one of these also on I think August 2nd. So this is our second launch webinar. It's a 5-week class. It's actually spread over 9 weeks. So it's more or less self-paced. You're doing a combination of online, you're actually meeting with your teams locally, and then you're also kind of submitting assignments online. You have coaches who'll be working with you. It's very much it's not like, you pass or fail. It's really about how you proceed with kind of understanding the work. Then once you complete the 9 weeks, there's a 4-week prototype and testing phase where you begin to try things out. We will be having a celebration somewhere at the end or after the end to celebrate, the challenge winners, which in this case so far has been pretty much everybody. It is a little bit like T-ball in that sense. If you do it and you give it your best, you win. And ideally at some point we'd like to think about ways to kind of have mentoring in your region as well. So there's participation in the training. There's a design team that you have to identify, who participate in this together from your consortium. And then there are design challenges, and we will review all of that. But first what we're going to do is we're going to have Virginia talk a little bit about just human-centered design generally, to kind of make sure we're all kind of grounded in what the work actually is.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to try to sidle up a little bit more to the computer here. Well, let's start with what is human-centered design? For one thing, as Randy said, human-centered design started initially a company called IDEO. There are many other companies that were involved in this early on. We're designing products, and like the first Apple computer, the first mouse, pill bottles, bicycles, canoes. And what they discovered as they were designing these products is that the design process itself could be replicated and used to design services for people. And so at the beginning of any project with human-centered design, you start with people. You start with what people need, what motivates them, what they are trying to get. And once you've done that, then you start looking at whether things are feasible, whether they're viable. So in this case, we're taking an approach to designing a 3-year plan, or changing how you're designing services or curriculum, or ways your students navigate through your system. And we're not starting with the law, the regulations, the state laws, all of the informational guidance that comes out from CDE and the chancellor's office. We're starting with people. What do they need? Who are your students? What motivates them? What could we do better to make it better for the students that we're trying to serve? Once we understand what people need, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about this, we start to understand what their stories are, we can develop themes, we can have insights into what people need that we might not have really understood otherwise. And from those insights, using the human-centered design process, we go through a set of activities that really allow us to brainstorm a million different ways we might come up with new solutions for people. And then we prototype and test and prototype and test. It's a very iterative process. So I'm just going to take us very quickly through each of these stages so that you can get a little bit of an idea about what we're talking about. I also want to point out, as I just described, that we're talking not about designing a new footprint for your school, or a new building, or a new textbook. We're actually talking about designing services. And there's some general principles. One, as I just said, is it's human-centered. And what I've discovered over the years is that in addition to being focused on your students or your customers, it's also important to design for the staff, for you, for teachers, for people who are in administration, for people who are running schools and running programs, because you could design a really terrific solution for your students that would drive you crazy. And if it drives you crazy, at some point or another, you're going to end up abandoning it and going back to a simpler way. So design is human in the largest sense, looking at our students and also looking at ourselves and the people who work in our systems. Second, design thinking and service design is very co-creative. We often think of innovation as some guy in a lab coat with crazy hair in a room discovering something on his own. And what's true in all the research that you see about innovation is that design is a team sport, that innovation happens when diverse people come together and have insights that they might not have had on their own. One of my favorite stories about this concept is down in the city of Long Beach. The workforce program there wanted to serve more homeless young people, and they actually included in their design team the security guard who stood in the front of the office every day, because in fact he saw more people than anyone else who worked on the staff. And what he said was, when young people came in who were obviously homeless, they were carrying all their stuff with them, they looked around, they couldn't find any place to put their stuff, and they would leave. And so as a result of having that perspective on the design team, people were able to have the insight that if you want to serve more homeless people, you need to find a place to put their stuff. And so they repurposed a supply closet that was in front of near the lobby, and the security guard stood next to it, and so they were able to start serving not only more homeless young people, but more homeless adults as well. So just having that different perspective in the room is always really useful in design thinking. Third, design thinking is orchestrated. Randy said this, you've got community colleges, you've got K-12 education, you've got workforce development programs, you've got community-based organizations, you have churches, you have a huge range of people in your communities who all are providing services, sometimes to the same population that you are. And so Service design is really about thinking about all of these different players and understanding how everything fits together in a much more orchestrated way. Service design is also very tangible. Sometimes when you say, oh, we're doing design thinking and human-centered design, it sounds very abstract and vague. And it's really the opposite. And I'll talk to you in a few minutes about journey mapping and how that works. But essentially, when you're starting to design for your students, you are looking at very tactical, physical touch points. What happens the first time someone walks through the door? What did they see? Who did they talk to? What forms do they have to fill out? When someone comes to a class for the first time, what does the room look like? How do they know where to go sit? I mean, the idea in design thinking is to get very specific and very tangible so that you can start to understand the entire experience of your students and not just sort of some vague, how was your day? Was it good or not? And last, design thinking is holistic. We're looking at the end-to-end experience. I would imagine for students who are wanting to learn English for the first time, for example, you might start with asking that student, what was the first time that they actually considered going to learn English in the first place? What motivated them? Where were they when they had that decision? Were they with other people? You really want to understand the whole experience from the very beginning when people first have awareness of your programs, for example, all the way through to the wild success that you have when your students have succeeded. So those are some of the principles of design thinking, just to give you a little feel for the underlying biases. And now I'm going to talk for a few minutes about the actual phases. But before, I want to point out this question, which we always use when we embark in design thinking. And the question is, how might we? And how implies we're going to do something. It implies that there are solutions that exist. We're not saying could we, will we, should we. We're saying we're going to do something. We just need to figure out how. The word might is very powerful because it actually reduces commitment. We're not saying how can we, how should we, how will we. We're just saying how might we. What are all the different ways? It allows us to be more creative and have more interesting ideas. And the word we implies that we're doing something together. That, as I said earlier, design thinking is a team sport, and we're in it together for the long haul. And so the other thing I'd say is, I don't know what your life is like, but often your work is pretty predictable. There are ups and downs. You've got times that are more busy than others, but it kind of goes in a straight line towards hopefully a trajectory upward. And design thinking is more like this. It's iterative, it's messy. You have an idea, you go back, you test it, it doesn't work, you try something else. But you'll notice the arrow is still pointed in the right direction. It's a messier process, which some people really love and embrace and drives other people crazy. But it is a very structured process. It's something that anyone can learn, which is why I'm really excited about design thinking and in fact kind of obsessed with it, because I've watched literally thousands of people over the course of the last 5 years go through this class where people learn in a very structured way with a set curriculum and protocols for questions and a very rigid's the wrong word, but a very comprehensive process by which at the end, everybody has learned how to use design thinking in their work. So the first step of design thinking is really listening. It's really understanding who your customers are and what's going on with them. And one way we do that is we really focus on empathy. And there are lots of different ways to empathize with people. This slide I I love this actually comes from IDEO. And one way you empathize is you observe. You don't just ask people questions. You don't just do a focus group. You don't send out a survey. You actually watch what people are doing, because it's been proven now over the years that often we don't actually report on what we do in the way that we actually do it. There's a great study that was done a few years ago that asked people what station they listen to when they're driving to work. And pretty much everybody said that they listened to the news or NPR. And researchers went and just turned on the cars and their radio and discovered that, like 70% of the people were listening to pop music or something. So they're not lying. It's just that they don't always pay attention to what they're doing. So this first image here, IDEO was designing a pill bottle, and they asked a woman in her 80s who had pretty severe arthritis in her hands what her experience was with her pill bottles. And she said, not a problem, easy. And they thought that was a little peculiar, so they asked if they could just observe her. And she came home from the pharmacy. She opened up her bag, she took out her pill bottles, and she went over to a deli meat slicer that she had on her kitchen counter, and she just sliced the top of the bottles off and poured her pills into baby food jars. So she created a workaround. I'm sure all of you have created workarounds in your own organizations as well. So it's important to watch what people are actually doing, not just ask them some very simple questions. It's also important to engage people, to really think about the kinds of information you want from them, and then to sit down with them and ask questions and just listen, not propose solutions, not come up with ideas immediately about how you can help people, but just really engage and listen. There were a group of nonprofit leaders in Tennessee when we did one of our projects with DOL a few years ago, who literally went and sat in each other's lobbies for 2 days and just talked to customers. They didn't let on who they were. They just pretended like they were another customer. They just sat there and engaged with people and listened and watched. And the second day, one of the nonprofit leaders, the leader of our design team, said she just wept when she went home, because after 2 days of really listening and engaging with the customers that were sitting in the lobby, what she heard was that the people who were coming into her and other nonprofits' offices saw the nonprofits as gatekeepers of information and gatekeepers of services. You're sitting in the lobby and you see that Sally got referred to a job and you didn't. Fred got into a training program and you didn't. It was really the opposite of transparent. And that insight from engaging and listening allowed them to really rethink how they wanted to interact with their customers in ways that would make them feel all like they were valued and participating, and not some people winning and some losing. And last, immersing yourself in environments. Following students around for a day, for example. I just saw, I think it was a 60 Minutes piece on a assistant principal who followed a student around for a day. Immersing yourself in an environment. This is a little picture of a guy at Kaiser Hospital who put a video cam up to his eyes, and at the end of the day, the staff at Kaiser watched what he saw, and essentially he saw a bunch of crappy ceiling tiles throughout the whole video. And it allowed them to really rethink. They just invested a whole lot of money in beautiful art for the walls and footprints on the floor. This was a real eye-opening experience for them as they went through the experience of one of their patients. Another way you can empathize with people and begin to really understand what their experience has been is to do journey mapping. This is an example. There are many examples of journey mapping where people, staff and customers get together and literally draw or put on sticky notes or however you want to do it, what a student's experience is from beginning to end. So I'm aware of the program. I read a flyer. I walked into the office. I filled out a form. Making tangible, as I said earlier, and explicit every single step of the way of that customer's journey, the student's journey through the process. And then to go back and ask customers, students, staff, where are the pain points? Where did this system not work? Where did this process not work for you? Where was it confusing? Where did it take too long? Where were the forms really complicated? And then where are there opportunities to make things better, to surprise and delight people, to make the journey work for the people you're trying to serve. So journey mapping is something you'll learn in this class and is a really great tool to help you empathize with your students. And I'll end this little section of it by just telling the story about David. This was a project we did with IDEO, who was helping us try to improve the programs in WIOA Title I for out-of-school youth. And David said that he just copied a friend's resume because he didn't know how to make one himself. And I'll come back to David in a moment and tell you what our insights were. This last slide here in this section is a quote from a design team down in the LA area who said that their experience in going through this class, in observing customers going through the intake process and really witnessing all the inconveniences that people had to go through, was really enlightening for all of the different partners. And I think there's another quote at the end that takes it even a step further. So once you've gathered a lot of information, you've empathized, again, class teaches you how to do it, gives you checklists and forms and activities that you will use in this process. You start to gather all that information together, you come back to your team, and you start to develop themes and insights. So here's David again. And even though I'm completely obsessed with human-centered design, my first thought when I saw that David was copying a resume was that we just needed to hook him up to a resume writing workshop, that we have them all over the state. He just needed to get linked in with the office there. And I apologize, we have some kind of weird construction going on in either above us or below us. It's hard to tell. And the insight that we had as we went through this design process is that we don't need to hook our young people up to resume writing classes. They don't need to sit through an hour-long class learning how to write a resume. We just need to give them templates, just exactly the way David was doing it, that you could tailor depending on the young person's schooling experience and work experience. So a good example of an insight that led to some interesting new ways of prototyping and testing services. We also discovered through pretty much every single team that worked with young people is that we discovered that we weren't as hip as we thought we were, which for any of you who have teenage children, you already learned that lesson, but that was definitely one of our findings. And I'll end with this one, that one of the insights that we had was that when unemployed people come into a career center, their emotional states actually matter. And I think it's the same for students, that if someone comes in and they are about to lose their house or their apartment or their car, they don't need labor market information. They don't need to learn how to write a resume or use LinkedIn. In fact, they don't even need a job. They need money, and they're panicked. And that person's really different than someone who sent out 200 resumes out into the black hole of the internet, who's never heard anything back. And those people are stalled. They don't know what to do next. And then there's some people who maybe their occupation has gone away, or their industry and their community, or they've come out of the military, and they need to figure out what their skills are and how they can translate those into some other industry. And they need to spend some time exploring what the labor market is. And what we tend to do in government services often is to have one one size fits all orientation, 1 hour orientation. Everybody goes through it. And for, 95% of the time, each one of the people in that room who has a different emotional state is listening like 5% of the time. And I'll talk later about what we did with this particular insight. But it gives you a good example of the kinds of themes that were developed as a result of really empathizing with the people we're trying to serve. Once you have some insights and you've developed some themes, then it's time to brainstorm. And brainstorming, you've all done it, is all about quantity. There's lots of data that says that, and research that says that quantity matters more than quality in brainstorming, and that, if you have 10 ideas, 2 might be good. If you have 100 ideas, maybe 20 are good. So there's some very structured activities around brainstorming using how might we questions. And brainstorming can be sort of a general activity, or it can be specific like this. How might we simplify the invoice process so Gloria can take a vacation? It can, your brainstorming can be self-serving in a good way, enlighten self-interest on the part of your staff. And once you have some ideas, you've done some brainstorming, you've got some how might we questions, and you've got some ideas about how to answer those questions, then the next step is to actually deliver. And this stage is something that we often don't do in government and education and in publicly funded programs, but it's about prototyping and testing and trying things. It's something that the tech industry is better at than we are. And there's something interesting about prototyping. If you hand someone a very rough idea, a sketch, something written on the back of a napkin, just a bullet points, some ideas, your fellow coworkers and partners can see potential and possibility. And when you hand them something that's polished and looks finished, people tend to see flaws and criticize. So the difference between sort of a rough sketch of how our partnership might work and what various different responsibilities we're each going to take as we start to think about working with an industry sector, for example. Looking at that together as a set of partners is really different than one partner going off, working on their own, typing something up very beautiful, having a PowerPoint slide and set of slides and coming back in and presenting it to other people. Then it's theirs, it's not ours. So prototyping is a really great way to learn more about what your ideas can accomplish or can't. And it's also a cheap way to fail. If you prototype something and test it and people immediately go, no, that's never going to work, you just move on to the next thing. You haven't invested a whole lot of time and energy in it. I love this slide. This is again from a workforce program team. They actually prototyped how the partners worked together to work with employers in their community, and discovered that when they looked at it, that it was a bunch of soldiers pointing guns at each other. That each partner agency was protecting their own employers, and that the prototype itself allowed them to learn a little bit more about the way they were behaving with each other. And then the creation of a new prototype in which everyone was sort of pulling along together was a vision that they could keep then as they actually started implementing the project. This is another prototype I really like. It's super, super simple. This is in a career center up in Oregon. When people walked through the door, the first thing they saw was a stanchion with a red hand stop sign that said, stop here. And all we did was prototype this little other sign that says, wait, you're up next, with a smiley face. And literally that one sign being put over the hand changed people's experiences. The receptionist there said, once that other sign went up, people literally were less surly when they got up to the front of the line. Here's another, this is an outcome of a set of prototypes that was done in Southern California that I really love. This is a workforce program that was working with young people. They had funding to fund employers to pay wages for 6 months for young people. And but no one was taking them up on the project. The employers that did call them were employers who tended to not really have an interest in the young people. They just really had an interest in the money. And after a bunch of prototyping in their community, they came up with this campaign. You gave me a job, a place to go after school, and someone to look up to. This poster, which went on the sides of buses and in newspapers, within 2 weeks after this poster going up, their calls from their employers increased 133%. And it was a set of employers who actually really wanted to give back and cared about young people in the community and really made commitments to keep those young people on in jobs after their internship was over. So design thinking, in my experience, once you've learned it, it's really hard to turn it off. Once you have mastered some of the principles in design thinking, it never ends. You work on one project, you finish it, you start working on another. It really is, in one sense, a method for continuous improvement that will hold your organization in really good stead as you move forward. So I'm going to turn this back over to Randy, and who's going to talk for a minute about a couple of the pilots that we ran in May, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the actual class itself.
So just to note that hopefully all of you are going to rush out and join the new course, but we did have 5 teams that went through this in May. This was the Avengers team. Your team will be asked to give yourself a name. We invite you to be creative. Something other than the acronym of your consortium would probably be a good start. But in the last presentation we did, actually, Dr. Sophia Gelpi actually kind of did a little testimonial about how this worked for their team, that it really helped them kind of, first of all, get to know each other better. Was it really an unintended consequence? And so they did something about like just how long their commute was to come to work one day. And they learned a lot about each other's lives just by discussing and sharing, which really helped them kind of move forward in terms of feeling like they were more connected to each other in the design process. But what their prototype was really, really interesting, because what they realized is this they had a fundamental issue around students being able to access the college and being able to access information about the college. And they came up with the idea of really designing their own app. And this was the prototype for the app that they designed. And they literally created little kind of app-sized cards, like the size of your phone, and then held it and kind of worked with it and kind of get a sense of what it would feel like to get information in a different way. Yeah, they tested it with students as well. And so this is just an example. And oftentimes the insights you have are discrete around a particular problem, but those kinds of insights really add up in a variety of ways as you apply them to different problems at your institution. And this is something that was very, very powerful for them and their team. Here's just some reflections from a participant in one of the teams about just participating in the course, and how you really kind of work with your students and talk to people, just to be an active participant. To be gentle with yourselves and do the best you can. There was really a point where I wanted to actually kind of send an email to everyone who did the course in May and say, stop being teachers. Because we're all teachers or human service professionals, we hold ourselves to very high standards about what it means to be a student very often. And they're very concerned, are we succeeding? Are we going to get a good grade? Are we going to get the certificate? And not really enjoying or immersing themselves in the experience. Really listen with an open mind to each other, really take time to reflect. I'm feeling very new agey suddenly. And to share what and I live in Berkeley, so it's even better. And to share what you learn with others. So I think that there's just that openness, that listening, And then to understand you're in a process that's kind of open-ended, that doesn't have, it has its own cadence, and you'll discover the cadence of that process as you immerse yourself into it. So I'm going to do some nuts and bolts stuff now. And you're going to hear us say design team in about 18 million different ways, because we can't stress enough the importance of this being really a team experience. You could do the course by yourself. This course is thousands of people do this course. You could sign up for it. It's free. You could do it. But we want you to really take the time to do this with folks from your consortium who represent the different interests, folks from adult schools, folks from community colleges, maybe someone from your workforce board. It can include customers. Yeah, it can include teachers, administrators. Really think about having a group of folks who represent kind of divergent kind of perspectives who work together on this. Because while you do some of the activities individually, a lot of the work is done in your weekly design team meetings, where you actually meet face to face if you can. And you really can't fail at this unless you don't meet. That's about the only way that this doesn't work, is if you don't set aside time to actually work with your team. We have 3 kind of pre-identified adult education challenges. We would expect that you would adapt those, refine those, change those. We'll get to those in a minute. There will be readings, case studies, and short videos as part of the Acumen platform. So the course begins on September 11th. It wraps up on November 13th. Here are the 5 sort of classes that you're going to cover. Introduction to human-centered design. There's an inspiration phase, the ideation phase, for synthesis, another one on prototyping, and then an implementation phase. We're trying to take you through the whole cycle. Just a hint, you should maybe think about the cycle in relationship to your whole consortium's planning process as well, because we've really tried to embed this in all the planning guidance for the coming year for your 3-year plan. What you will learn, you're going to learn design thinking mindsets. This is empathy, show, don't tell, really to be open to kind of experimentation, the open-endedness of the process. Design thinking it's kind of a nice circular process that iterates on top of itself. You apply it to a problem and you come back and you have a new problem, you apply it to that problem, and then you find it basically embeds itself in the way you think about almost any problem you come into contact with. Tips for your team. Set aside 5 to 7 hours per week for yourself to do this. That includes your meeting time, that includes your time on the platform, the completion of the assignments. Schedule your recurring meeting, add it to everyone's calendars. Probably the first thing you should do is calendar. So like the first, or maybe that's the second thing. The first thing you do is you agree to do it, but the second thing you do is you understand that we're going to meet. I ran some similar projects around kind of cohort-based instructional strategies for people with barriers to employment, and we had the only cohorts that ever failed were where the instructors actually didn't agree to a common meeting time every week. This is where everything kind of comes together. Be sure you have access to your customers, because we want you to go interview your customers, observe your customers, spend time in the field. There's a field work part of this. Be flexible. And once again, don't be a teacher. Don't worry about getting it right or the schedule. Obviously, we would like you to get through all 5 classes in the 9-week period. Some folks, it took them a couple weeks to get going. Some folks launched right in and then they had a pause in the middle. 5 of the 7 teams we had in May made it through to the end of the course on time. And at least one of the others said, hey, we're going to continue working on this. We didn't get the last activity in, but we're actually going to keep working. There's 3 different entities working behind the scenes on this. Obviously, Virginia and I and all of us in the adult education program world. IDEO, these are the folks who kind of invented human-centered design. Then there's Acumen, who actually provides the training, and NovoEd is the platform. So when you log on, you'll probably be getting emails from Acumen, just to be aware that these are sort of the organizations that behind the scenes, if you see them referenced, just to be familiar with them. Is there a set class schedule every week? No, it is basically self-paced. You do it when you can. So there's kind of a recommended cadence to sort of the courses themselves, the parts of the course. We recommend you try to keep to those, but if you don't and you need to catch up, that's fine as well. Will a certificate be awarded upon completion of the course? Yes. It's not like something you're going to carry out and put in your resume necessarily, but you could if you wanted to. but we will note that you've actually done the course and you will get a certificate. So the timeline, so just to note that there are two different kind of registration deadlines. If you get your team to us on the 20th, we will actually get everyone registered on the 21st, and you'll actually start getting messages from Acumen early, and you'll have the ability to go on and explore parts of the platform. There will be a second registration deadline on September 4th when you need to get information to us, and that's really to be ready to roll on September 11th. It's important that, and this will include information about your team. So everyone who's on the team, their email addresses, who the team lead is, and what your challenge is, and your team name, the most important thing, which will not be the acronym of your consortium. There will be, each team will be assigned a course. Oh my God, I apologize for what's going on in my building. Course ends in November 13th. And then the idea is that in November, you begin prototyping and testing whatever it is you came up with. There's another date on here on August 30th. There will be an onboarding webinar led by the coaches themselves. We have at least 3 and as many as 7 or 8 coaches who may be participating. Your team will have 1 or 2 coaches assigned to them. They will be reaching out to you. If they reach out to you, don't take it to mean you're being sent to the principal's office. It just means that they're just trying to check in, be sure everything's going okay. They're there to help you. They're not there necessarily to really like monitor your progress or to ping you if you're not on time. Important registration dates. So August 20th, kickoff April 30th, September 4th, the final deadline for registration. So lessons learned from the pilot, and I've referenced some of these already. You can't fail this course unless you don't schedule your team to meet ahead of time. Don't worry so much about deadlines as really the process of going through the materials. Expect a lot of communication. Don't stress out if we're emailing you all the time. They will schedule things like office hours when you can all get online with them as well. Coaches are your friends. Fish your friends, not food. So the steps to really get moving forward is to identify who your team leader is. Your team leader should be a participant. It's someone who works with your team. We had one team in May who said, oh, this is our team leader, but that team leader didn't know they were actually taking the course with them, which ended up not being that helpful.
And a co-chair, or second, a captain and a co-captain, so that if something happens, team leader drops out, there's someone else there who's willing to step
in. Try to have your group be diverse. Don't do it just for your college or for your adult school or for just adult schools or the colleges in your consortium. It's really a chance to have diverse perspectives, because the challenge is finding common themes, building new strategies within the diversity of people that you have there. So, folks from K-12, adult ed, K-12 adult ed, non-credit. Stakeholders that work with customers are really good to have service staff, to have instructors as part of it. You can include customers. We recommend that as well. Also, if you're ambitious as a consortium and you guys are totally bought in and you want to have 2 teams, we can totally accommodate that. We've actually made space for as many as 50 teams. We don't expect that many, but we're sort of, we can accommodate that many. Here are the 3 challenges that we identified. Obviously, these are very familiar issues for those of you in the adult education universe. How do we increase access to and retention of students in adult education? How might we help more students transition into post-secondary education? And how might we collectively strengthen career pipelines into higher wage employment? Obviously, these are fairly high-level challenges. Oftentimes, one of the first things that people do is sort of they will focus in on something maybe more discrete. But these are just places to start. They're clearly aligned to the adult education program objectives.
And I would just say that this course, as Randy said, is an online course that anyone can take, MOOC. And there are thousands of people from across the world who are taking this class at any time. We want you to focus on one of these challenges that you'll probably refine as you move through it, as opposed to helping to figure out how to build better wells in Egypt. This is the beauty of this class, as Randy said, is that when you're done, you have some ideas that you're testing and trying to implement. So you're actually learning by doing.
As I said, you'll probably refine your challenge question during the process. This is a good thing. We're not going to be like, how come you chose that? It's not really our role to tell you what to choose. It's really your role to explore and figure that out. Register for the course. So once again, this is a reiteration of the steps. Pick your leader, your co-leader, identify your team members, and then send everything to Jimmy Gilroy at wested.org. This is the contact information. As soon as you send that to him, you will receive an email receipt from him. And then once your batch upload occurs, you'll start getting probably 2 or 3 emails that will confuse you initially from Acumen until you log in and get settled in. So once again, there will be a kickoff webinar on August 30th. They will actually go through the platform a little bit on that webinar. I've been promised this, so they help people feel comfortable the first time they get on. And we promised to try and create an information page in the AEBG website related to human-centered design. Coaching support, you will hear from your coaches pretty much weekly. They will have tips on how to facilitate meetings with your team, help in communicating, sharing your best practices. There's a chance to communicate any issues your team has with the course assignments. And there may be video calls with Acumen for peer sharing as well. Suggested supplies, kind of the normal stuff, Post-it notes, pens, pencils, markers, paper, just all the stuff you would use for planning, meeting planning, access to whiteboards. And take pictures. It's really important to have your phones available to take pictures of your products. This is one of the few times an educator is going to tell you, please use your phone. To have things you can work with to make it tangible, to work with it, make it physical for yourself. Here is a very nice quote that Virginia inserted in here. Open, honest communication, as well as working together to develop innovative solutions, increase the level of partner engagement and team building. This is a quote from a participant in the course. So now we're going to open it up for questions. I don't see anything that look like questions so far for us. Do people have any observations? Sarah Walker, if I don't have a team. So Sarah, I guess maybe identify who you are to us, and because there may be other people also pinging us on this, and we could figure out if we can connect you up with someone. So just to be clear, anyone can go on Plus Acumen and actually find the course and do the course on their own. The way we've designed this is to provide support. So specifically, we've kind of set up a separate part of the platform for AEBG and support that's actually dedicated to teams. But if you're having a hard time finding folks in your consortium to be a team, just tell us what consortium you are, and we can reach out to your consortium and find out if they're thinking about participating. It may just be that you're not aware that some other people are talking about this. Will this opportunity be offered again? This is a busy time of year. So Acumen has a regular schedule that 3 times a year. We believe there's another one in January. So it may come up again. I would say that I understand that September is busy. Everyone's coming back on board. The term is pretty new. I will say that in terms of the 3-year planning cycle, I would say September is an ideal time to figure out if there's a way you can actually do this now rather than January. I think you do it whenever you want, and I think that's fine. I do think that we've kind of laid out the planning phases. So there's this kind of, pre-planning, kind of self-assessment phase, kind of getting your planning things together. And this is a really good first step for people to take to kind of get their planning process moving forward. So Sarah's with Livermore Adult Education. Okay, Sarah, thanks for that. And we will see what we can do with that.
Hi, Virginia and Randy.
Other questions?
That last part that you were talking about, we were unable to hear you. Your audio had cut out.
Now that you've listened to us talk for an hour, and what do you think? Do you think you might love to see this about it? You're definitely going to do it. People, Yep. Aha. Oh, I just said if anyone is actually interested and or right now that you're want to enroll in this opportunity, we'd love to have you just type that in the chat box right now. Just either I'm thinking about it, I want to go back and talk to other team members, excited, feel like I want to do it. We'd love to just hear that little feedback before we wrap this up.
San Diego's in the house.
Kelly.
Multiple attendees are typing. I'm excited. It'll be hard to get a team together. Excels, I think that's Silicon Valley area. I would like to have folks.
Great.
Matt, thank you for the feedback. Crystal Robinson, yes.
A couple of points about the planning process. Randy and I see a number of places where design thinking can really help with your planning process. The first is what Randy just talked about a minute ago, which is that one of the unintended consequences of diverse teams working together is that you get to know each other and you get to trust each other. And often you're kind of partners. You work in a K-12 school, someone works in a community college, you come together for some meetings, but this actually allows you to really get to know each other and your programs in a much deeper way, and it builds trust. And trust at the beginning of a planning process is a really good thing to have. Also, pretty much every single team that we've heard from has said, you know what, we thought we knew where our customers were, we thought we knew what our students needed, and we didn't. We get, as Randy said at the beginning of this, we get so tied up in our data systems, our reporting, our forms, our regulations that we just lose touch with why we're in this business in the first place, which is to help people. The work that you do is, in my opinion, righteous work, and this process helps reconnect you back to the reason that you were doing it in the first place. And that kind of mission and vision as you go into a planning process is also incredibly valuable.
So Diane Edwards has a question. Hi, Diane. That the online learning part is asynchronous, which I'm presuming to mean that not everybody has to be on the platform at the same time, and that is correct. So everyone goes, they engage with the online platform, they do the lessons there, and they come together and meet as a team, and they do certain activities and assignments as a team. So let me just repeat again a couple of the deadline issues they're kind of currently. So if you think you have your team together and you want to get them registered, for the sooner, the first deadline, which would be, we would like you to try and have your information in on Monday to Jimmy Gilroy. That's jgilroy@wested.org. I should also say that these PowerPoint slides and the recording of this webinar will be available. So if you want to actually show this to your consortium or share it there, you can as well. I think